Discover 3 Sinister Island Horror Tales, Unexplained, Cursed Secrets Exposed that Haunt Forever. The wind howled like a banshee as the 3 families set foot on the desolate shores of the isolated island in Maine. Greg, Sarah, Tom and Lisa exchanged glances, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that crept along their spines. They had hoped for an escape from their mundane suburban lives, but a sense of dread loomed heavy over the campsite, as if the very ground beneath them whispered warnings of old tragedies. As dusk fell, the sun sank slowly, painting the sky in terrifying shades of crimson and purple that felt like bruises on the landscape. The flickering flames of the campfire danced, casting distorted shadows that twisted and turned in the darkening woods. The laughter of the children faded, replaced by an uneasy silence punctuated by distant rustling in the trees. Sarah's heart raced. She watched the trees as if they were alive, shivering with possibilities, that something or someone was watching back. What did those locals really know, she thought, her eyes darting to the flickering campfire that crackled ominously. She noticed Tom shift nervously, his laughter a too loud overlay on the tension thick enough to choke on. Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system, and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As the clock inched toward midnight, the forest erupted with sounds, sinister whispers that slithered through the air. Shadows flitted just beyond the fire's reach, hiding secrets that clawed at Sarah's sanity. Her palms grew clammy as she cast furtive glances towards the others. Their faces mirrored her own fear. Those once joyful expressions now tightened in worry. The oppressive darkness seemed to swallow the children's nervous giggles. The warmth of companionship was overshadowed by an icy grip of paranoia. One by one, their phones died, trapping them in a mobile-less prison. Sarah pressed the power button again and again, cursing the silence that gripped her world. What if they weren't safe here? The thought clawed at her mind, shredding her sense of comfort. Then, just when a pause promised safety, the trees sighed, and a man stumbled into their flickering glow. His eyes bulged, wild and imploring. "The island is alive! You have to leave!" he gasped, the weight of his words making the air thicker, suffocating. Panic surged through Sarah. How could something so charming suddenly turn into a nightmare? The dark truth sank deep, coiling around her gut. The fleeing laughter of children pierced the suffocating silence as fear seeped like poison beneath their skin. As dawn approached, bruised and weary, they faced shadows that stretched long, mingling with every hope of escape. Who would remain unscathed? What webs of deceit had entwined them into waking horror? How long could they outrun the island's chilling grasp before it claimed its next victim? The air grew even colder as the first light of dawn barely illuminated the treetops. The man's warning echoed in Sarah's mind, each syllable slicing through her thoughts like a blade. What did he mean? What was alive? Greg stood up, his shadow stretching ominously. "We can't stay here. If that guy was right—" He trailed off, but they all knew what he meant. The fear consumed them, sliding into their bones. With trembling hands, Sarah pulled Lisa and her children closer, their wide eyes reflecting the dawn's dim light. "Do you think any boats are coming?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It sent a chill spiraling down Sarah's spine. "The locals, they didn't exactly want us here." Tom picked up firewood, tossing another log into the dying flames that seemed to hiss at him. "We'll figure something out. Maybe we can hike to the other side of the island. We can't just sit here." But deep inside, Sarah felt the ground's unholy pulse, each throb matching the quickening of her heart. The whispers from the trees grew louder, as if urging her to listen. She glanced at the group, each face tense and determined, yet vacated of hope. As they gathered their things, the shadows thinned, but an unshakable dread lingered in the air. Was it ever really safe? Sarah thought, a thought that surfaced between her frantic breaths. The danger was palpable, and it felt like it slathered the island itself. They moved cautiously along the narrow path, leading away from the camp, the laughter and memories of yesterday's festivities replaced by invasive silence. Tom led the way, glancing back as if checking for something that lurked behind them. "Did you hear that?" Greg's whisper sent icy fingers crawling along Sarah's spine. Sound weaved through the trees, a cacophony of moans and lamenting cries. She turned, peering into the thick foliage. The shadows danced, intertwining with the fading light, daring her to step closer. "It's just the wind," Tom insisted, hastening his pace. But the voices grew more distinct, drenching the air with sorrowful melodies, an eerie lullaby that chilled the marrow in their bones. The island seemed eager to enfold its secrets, to draw them deeper. Sarah's eyes darted to the left, where hidden among the twisted roots was something. Not quite an animal, not quite a human. It moved with an unnatural grace, slinking away before she could catch a better look. "Did you see that?" she gasped, breath hitching. "See what?" Tom snapped, but Sarah couldn't ignore it. Her heart raced. As they trudged forward, Greg stumbled, the ground cracking beneath his feet. "What the—" Then the earth beneath him gave way, revealing a dark hole slathered in moisture. A fetid stench wafted up, almost alive. From its depths, shadows reached out as if beckoning him in. "Get back!" Sarah shouted, fear igniting her voice. They lunged forward, pulling Greg back just in time. "What is happening?" Lisa cried, clutching her children, who peered over her shoulder, wide-eyed. The moment was surreal until it wasn't. The sounds shifted again, morphing into anguished wails that reverberated through their very souls. "We need to get off this island," Greg yelled, his voice hoarse with terror. They sprinted, desperate and disoriented, as the shadows seemed to chase them, wrapping tendrils of darkness around their ankles, trying to drag them back to the unknown. But the path twisted, and the forest thickened, a spider's web of ancient trees that threatened to swallow them whole. Just when they thought they had no choice but to retreat, a flicker of light appeared up ahead, a clearing, a glimmer of hope, or doom. What awaited them in the light? Would it be salvation, or would the island's curse tighten its grip even more? The clearing opened like a wound, naked and raw under the morning sun. But the warmth offered no comfort. A strange silence blanketed everything. Even the distant cries faded into a haunting stillness. Sarah's heart raced, and the light felt wrong, too bright, too harsh, an unnatural spotlight on their terror. "Is this it?" Lisa's words stumbled out, quaking as they crossed the threshold. The clearing was barren, except for twisted remnants of what once might have been trees, now little more than skeletons clawing at the sky, draped in a suffocating mist. Tom stepped forward cautiously, squinting into the light. "Maybe we can see the water from here," he said, but the determination in his voice sounded tenuous, like fraying rope. They lingered at the edge, and Sarah couldn't shake the sensation that they had stumbled into a trap laid out by the island itself. The ground felt unsteady beneath her, pulsing, waiting. Then, without warning, the whispers returned, but this time they were sharper, clearer. "Come to us!" It was a chorus, a beckoning of lost souls, twisting through the air like smoke. Sarah shuddered at the sound. Her instinct screamed for them to leave, yet her body felt anchored in place. "Look over there!" Greg pointed toward what appeared to be a silhouette standing at the far edge of the clearing. It moved against the backdrop of mist, a figure blurred and shifting. "What is that?" Fear clutched at Sarah, binding her legs. "We shouldn't go closer," she warned, her voice cracking, but the curiosity was overpowering, pulling them like moths to a flame. One by one, they took hesitant steps forward, Lisa gripping her children tightly to her side, the fragile hope appearing to shimmer just beyond reach. As they moved, the figure resolved into a form, a woman swathed in rags that hung loosely off her frame. Her long, dark hair veiled her face, but as she turned slightly, Sarah felt the air chill even more. There was something wrong about her. Her eyes were sunken pits, void of life, and yet they seemed to penetrate deep into their souls. "Help me," the woman rasped, the plea slithering out, wrapping around Sarah's senses. "Find him." "Who?" Greg's voice trembled, his bravado deflating under her gaze, but before the woman could answer, the ground shifted suddenly, and Sarah could feel roots breaking the surface, snaking towards them like grasping fingers. Greg stepped back, yelling, "Get away!" Panic erupted. They stumbled over each other, hearts racing as the whispers morphed into screams, unsettling and clamoring. The air thrummed with the energy of something vast and angry, a dark force coiling tightly around them. "Run!" Sarah shouted, the command pulling them into her own surge of adrenaline. They sprinted back toward the path, navigating through the brambles and roots that twisted like living creatures. The woman's cry still echoed in her mind, a warning or a curse, she couldn't tell, but it lingered with her. The shadows rose from the ground, aesthetic and oppressive, encroaching as if they were the island's sentries, denying their escape. The gnarled trees seemed to lean closer, bearing down heavy upon them as they fled. Just as they reached the edge of the clearing, Sarah stumbled again, falling against the wet earth. Breathless and terrified, she turned back, her heart plummeting. The silhouettes twirled at the edge of the clearing, whispering in a hissing cadence, the woman at the forefront, her eyes piercing, as if she were weighing their worth. "Who is she?" Tom gasped, panic weaving into every syllable. What did she mean? And then they heard it, a low, growling rumble, coming not from the ground, but from the very trees surrounding them. An ancient warning, an awakening of something far worse than they had imagined. "Keep moving!" Sarah yelled, but the oppressive air felt suffocating. But deep inside her, dread sparked. She could hardly form the thought, what if the island was alive? What if it didn't want them to leave? They raced back toward the path, a frantic escape fueled by primal instinct. But the shadows were gaining ground, growing larger and twisting into shapes that bore the weight of their nightmares. Just as they thought they could break free, a thunderous crash echoed behind them, followed by a deep, ominous voice that ripped through the air. "You cannot escape!" What barriers had they crossed? What horrors awaited them as they ran deeper into that suffocating wood? Branches snapped like bones as they charged through the dense thicket, the chill of the shadows brushing against them like icy fingers. Each heartbeat thudded in Sarah's ears, louder, quicker, almost drowning out the desperate cries of her friends. Their gasps filled the air, harsher than any wind, every breath a reminder of the terror that chased them. "Stop! We need a plan!" Tom panted, staggering to a halt under a low-hanging branch that clawed at his scalp. The bramble thrummed around them, an unsettling chorus of life and death. "Plan? We just need to get out!" Sarah cried, her fists trembling as she looked back at the clearing. The shadows seemed to pulse, weaving together into an ever-growing mass behind them. The woman stood among them, her hollow eyes glowing like dying embers, her voice rising above the chaos. "Find him!" She pointed with a skeletal finger into the dark. "No, we can't go back!" Lisa screeched, clawing onto Greg's arm. The children clung to their mother, eyes round and wet, sensing the suffocating dread that enveloped them. "Listen!" Greg shouted, his voice cracking under pressure. "We don't know what that means. We don't know what she wants." But the whispers nudged at the edges of Sarah's mind, tempting her with a spell of curiosity. What if we do need to help her? She wondered, fighting against the terror gripping her stomach. What if the woman was a warning? What if somewhere in that frantic plea lay a map to their survival? The ground pulsed beneath them again, a low thrum like a heartbeat, and the air thickened, suffocating her in dread. She felt drawn, not just to the woman, but to the shadows themselves, as if they held a secret locked deep in their essence. What if she knows how to escape? No! Tom's face twisted with fear. If we turn back, that's where they want us to go. We'll die here if we don't move. Sarah felt the sting of desperation behind her eyes. She didn't want to believe they were being led into a trap that might have been there long before they even set foot on the cursed land. Suddenly, the echoes of the jungle shifted. The growl morphed into a gurgled roar, and thick mist began to seep between the trees, its tendrils slithering around their ankles. A monstrous shape loomed just behind the tree line, its mouth a dark chasm. "Help!" it hissed, mirroring the woman's voice in a horrible echo that sent a wave of pure terror racing through their veins. "Run!" Greg's scream ripped through the air, igniting their instincts. They took off again, feet pounding wildly on the uneven ground, the shadows stretching, clawing at their heels. Deeper they plunged into the trees, not knowing what hideous form of death lurked behind them. Behind a curtain of mist and branches, shadows twisted into grotesque shapes, indistinct but somehow alive. The wails morphed into a single word: "Stay!" Surging with anger like a crashing wave, forcing them to stop short. "Sarah!" Lisa screamed, her voice cracking as her foot caught an unseen root, sending her sprawling into the dirt. "No, get up!" Sarah shouted, her heart racing as she turned back out of instinct. The shadows shifted like a collective beast, a dark tide ready to swallow her whole. She felt the weight of the mist closing in, its bitter cold crawling against her skin. Lisa tried to rise, her eyes wide with terror, but the shadows were already upon them. Tom pulled Lisa's arm, but it felt like they were pulling against lead. Sarah leaned down to help, but as she touched Lisa's shoulder, the ground trembled again, and a wretched laugh echoed through the trees. "What are you doing?" Greg's voice was barely over a whisper, as if speaking could summon worse horrors. And then, from the shroud of shadows emerged a silhouette, a figure darting at them through the mist, swift and feral. The last thing Sarah saw was a flash of white teeth, glinting like blades in the dark, before the shadows enveloped her scream. As everything cried out with renewed fury, a darkness pressed down, trying to snuff out their hope, leaving them to question, could anybody truly escape the grip of the island? And as silence fell once more, Sarah felt the threads of her reality unraveling, what awaited them in the thickening blackness. The mist swallowed Sarah whole, an icy blanket that cut off her breath. She gasped, struggling against the weight of fear suffocating her chest. It was as if the darkness had teeth, sinking into her very being, sapping the warmth and hope from her veins. "Where are you?" she choked out, her voice swallowed by the oppressive fog. The sounds of chaos faded, replaced by an eerie stillness that buzzed in her ears. Had they moved on without her? She stumbled, the ground crumbling beneath her. In the thick fog, shapes twisted and turned as if the shadows themselves were writhing with malevolence. She wished she could reach out and find her friends, Tom, Greg, Lisa, but she had no idea where to go. Panic clawed at her insides, tightening like a vice. Then a whisper, "Help!" softly curled around her, pulling her attention like a siren song. It sounded exactly like the woman from before. "Is anyone there?" she shouted, her voice hoarse and trembling, betraying her fear. The shadows shifted and darted. Had she seen something, or was it her mind playing tricks? From the fog, a figure materialized, barely visible at first. It hovered, melding with the darkness, its outline jagged and uncertain. Sarah squinted, her heart racing. Was this friend or foe? "Find him." The voice was a shiver. It echoed like a chill ghost whispering secrets in her ear. "Find who?" she demanded, stepping closer despite the trembling in her legs. Is it someone I know? The figure wavered. In that sickeningly still moment, she could almost make out the features. It looked like a child. Her heart sank. Another victim? Help me. The figure reached out a hand, pale and trembling. Sarah felt an instinctual urge to respond, drawn to the child like a moth to a flame, but every fibre of her being screamed to run. Wait! But the child, lost in the fog, begged, "They won't let me go. You have to help me." "No!" she gasped instinctively, recoiling. The child's expression twisted from pleading to anguish. A wail erupted, shattering the silence. And then the shadows melted. The threat of something more sinister spilled into the clearing with a rush, and the child vanished into the dark. Sarah felt as if she had stepped into an abyss, the ground slippery beneath her shoes. "Help me, help me," echoed from all directions now, confusion swirling like a vortex. "Tom, Lisa, Greg," she screamed, searching desperately for any flicker of her friends, any sign of safety. But her words seemed to vanish into the haze, devoured by the dreary fog. Just when hope felt lost, she heard a different sound, a rustling, a growl. It was low and menacing, echoing through the trees. She spun around, breath hitching in her throat, eyes wide with terror. The shadows formed again, morphing into a shape that loomed closer, its hunger palpable. A monstrous silhouette twisted against the backdrop of the barely there moon. It was coming for her, its movements quickening in the suffocating mist. Sarah ran, heart pounding like a drum, colliding with branches that reached for her like claws. "No, no, no!" The words left her mouth as she plunged deeper into the thicket, praying for a way out. A sudden yelp cut through her panic, a voice she knew. "Sarah!" It was Lisa, barely audible against the sinister growls. "I'm here!" She darted in the direction of the sound, heart racing as the shadows chased her, but every step felt like they were dragging her back, urging her to stop, to look, to just give in. And just at the edge of her vision she caught a glimpse of her friends, their eyes wide with dread, faces pale like ghosts. But they were not alone. A figure stood behind them, dark and twisted, blocking their path. A scream threatened to escape Sarah's throat, clawing for freedom, but she stifled it in fear of making things worse. What did it want? "Keep running!" shouted Tom, desperation coating his voice. "Don't look back! Just go!" But the howl of the creature sent shivers cascading down her spine. Escape was slipping through her fingers like sand. She felt the fog tightening around her again, and for a split second her mind whispered, what if staying was the only way to survive? The shadows surged closer, a wall of malevolent intent, as Sarah raced toward her friends. Yet inside the tempest of fear, a sinister question began to form. What if the curse of the island was the only thing keeping them alive? And in the swirling blackness, they could feel the grip of the unknown tightening around them as the true horror lurked just beyond sight. What truth lay hidden in the shadows? Fingers of fog curled around Sarah's ankles as she bolted toward Lisa, her chest heaving with desperation. The growls bore down upon her, primal and cutting, filled with something ancient and sinister. With every frantic step, she felt the presence behind her, lurking, hungry. "Sarah!" Lisa shouted again, her voice trembling, filled with panic. "Hurry! We have to go!" But the shadows twisted, dark waves crashing against the fragile light of the moon. Fear suffocated her. It pressed heavily against her throat. If she didn't run faster, if she hesitated even for a moment, they would be lost, swallowed by the fog. She could just make out Tom and Greg behind Lisa, their faces drawn tight with terror. Tom was pointing, urging them toward a dimly lit path that wove deeper into the woods. Behind him, the silhouette of the creature writhed, twisting with unimaginable speed. "Now! This way!" Lisa yelled, and Sarah followed, completely desperate. The path was narrow and uneven, roots snaking across the ground like thick, gnarled fingers. The sound of breaking branches echoed, and each crack sent waves of terror rolling through her. She chanced to glance back and nearly stumbled. The shape was closer now, its form shifting like smoke. "Keep running!" Greg shouted, his voice filled with a raw urgency that shook her to the core. They tore through the trees, pushing themselves harder than ever, but the oppressive fog weighed them down. It seemed to conspire against them, coaxing them into defeat. Her heart raced faster than her feet could carry her. "What is that thing?" she gasped, her voice ragged and strained. "Just don't look back." Tom's shout held a commanding edge, but he too was barely holding on to courage. They broke free of the trees into a small clearing that felt both haunting and strangely delicate. Moonlight cast silver patterns on the ground, illuminating patches of grass. But as they stumbled into the clearing, the atmosphere shifted. A pulse of darkness thickened the air, pressing against their skin like icy fingers. "Where do we go?" Lisa whimpered, glancing around wildly. "There must be a way out." "Back!" Sarah cried. "We can't go back, it's—" But before she finished, the growl erupted again. It wasn't just a sound. It was a promise of pain. Then something within the haze caught Sarah's eye. Glimmering fragments littered the ground ahead, sparkling like stars against the dark earth. "Look!" she shouted, but the dread in her chest soared. "What is that?" It's a way out!" Tom shouted, hope flickering. But as they approached, that familiar childlike whisper arose, drowning out their thoughts. "Help me!" It echoed all too softly, wrapping around them like a noose. The scattered fragments pulsed with an eerie glow, and Sarah felt a pull, a deep, unsettling desire to reach out. "No, we can't trust it," Greg yelled, a shudder coursing through him. But the voices grew louder, entwined with that insidious call for help. "Stay back!" Sarah cried, but it was too late. Tom stepped forward, entranced by the shine, his eyes glazed over. That darkness bore into her, seeing through her. She couldn't let him go. "Tom, no!" Just as she lunged, a shivering gust swept through the clearing, knocking her to the ground. Sarah looked up, horror clawing at her throat. Tom's figure jerked as he reached for the fragments, but a shadowed hand shot out from the deep fog, snatching him with a vice grip. "Tom!" Lisa's scream shattered the air as shadows swirled around him, pulling him into their midst. Then, as quickly as it began, the fog receded, leaving only silence hanging like a shroud over the clearing. Heart thudding, Sarah gasped for air. "What just happened?" Greg shook his head, terror flickering across his face. We can't stand here. We have to find him. We have to—" But as despair settled back in, cold and oppressive, the nightmare whispered its truths again. "Help me." Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble, cracks widening apart, exposing a dark chasm that seemed to breathe. "Run!" Sarah screamed, grasping Lisa's arm, pulling her away from the edge, but the voices surrounded them, beckoning them closer, promising freedom, if they just gave in. What waited on the other side of that abyss? Would they find their friend, or was something far worse lurking, watching, waiting? "Don't look back," Sarah thought, as dread wrapped around her heart, but she was running out of time. The chasm yawned wider, jagged edges like teeth ready to consume whatever dared approach. Sarah felt the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, a sinister rhythm that matched the frantic hammering of her heart. Behind her, Lisa's panicked gasp pierced the night. "Where do we go?" Lisa cried, her voice quaking. "We have to keep moving," Sarah shouted, panic rising in her chest. They couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. They turned and sprinted down the dark path, the shimmering fragments glinting at their backs like taunting stars in a starless sky. "Tom, we have to find him," Greg murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. The despair in his tone twisted a knife in Sarah's gut. Determined footsteps echoed like fading ghosts through the trees, but uncertainty hung thick in the air, wrapping around her like barbed wire. A sudden chill settled, the oppressive fog swirling around them, moving as though alive. Each breath felt heavier as shadows pressed close, thickening with every passing moment. "Do you hear that?" Lisa's voice trembled as she stumbled, catching herself on a nearby tree, her eyes wide and searching. Sarah paused, straining to listen against the murmurs of the wind. It was faint, but there it was, the whisper. "Help me!" The plea clawed at her mind, so soft yet powerful, as if a fragile thread connected them to Tom. Would they find him? "Come on!" Sarah snapped, shaking off the madness. "We have to go, now!" They pushed deeper into the woods, the trees towering over them like sentinels, warding off the chill. The whisper grew more insistent, curling around their thoughts, drawing them away from the path. It promised salvation, warmth, safety, everything they craved in that moment of fear. "You're just hearing things," Greg shouted, struggling against the pull. "We need to focus." But it was too late. The shadows spiraled and converged ahead, morphing into shapes, dark figures that flickered at the edge of the moonlight. Anxiety surged as the figures took form, stretching toward them like long-lost arms reaching for warmth. "Run!" Sarah yelled, grabbing Greg's arm. But the force pulling them was relentless, an unseen current driving them toward the darkness. Lisa stumbled and fell, grasping at Sarah's ankles, her breath ragged. "Help me!" the voice called, seductive and sweet. "It's a trap!" Sarah shouted, yanking Lisa to her feet. The ground shivered beneath them, alive with an urgency that made her skin crawl. They staggered back, desperate to escape the reaches of the shadows, but the darkness flowed like liquid, swallowing the ground behind them. The shadows writhed, and then suddenly a terrible roar erupted from within. A creature emerged, clawed and enormous, its eyes burning with a feral hunger. The whisper transformed into a deafening scream that resonated fiercely against the trees. It bore down on them like a predator, hungry, relentless. "Sarah!" Lisa screamed, her voice filled with raw terror. The urge to look back was overwhelming, but Sarah gritted her teeth and pressed onward, her legs pumping with all the strength she had left. The defiant roar of the creature rang in her ears, melding with the cries of her friends, a chaotic symphony of terror. "We have to find a way out," she shouted, desperation punctuating every word. But as they stumbled through the fog, the ground trembled again, gaping fissures tearing through the earth like angry mouths. With a sinking heart, Sarah realized that somewhere in this darkness Tom might be lost. Or worse yet, he might have become part of the shadows. As they veered wildly from the choking darkness, something cold grazed her hand, a chilling touch, a promise of despair. "Keep moving," Greg urged, pulling her forward, but as her world spun, whiteness surged into view, their path split before them, branching into darkness. "Which way?" she gasped, breathless, fear gnawing at her sanity. And as if in answer, the voice echoed once more, a single-pained wail that cut through the fog, clearer now, pleading desperately for help from somewhere ahead. Tom! Hope twisted with dread. Was he alive? Would they be able to save him at the cost of their own freedom? The shadows gathered, pulsating, waiting, ready to devour them whole. "Sarah, which way?" Greg's voice wobbled, uncertainty creeping in around them. "Here," she whispered, her heart racing. "We have to go that way." But as they hesitated, a sudden tremor shook the ground harder than before, rattling the trees, making time stand still. It was a final warning, and they had precious little left. A low growl resonated from the depths behind them, mingling with the whisper. It promised more than just darkness. It promised terror that would follow them for eternity. "Run!" she shouted again, but deep down she wondered if they'd ever truly escape. What awaited them next, down that darkened path? The air tensed, thick with dread, as they sprinted into the unknown. The forest churned around them, a living nightmare. Shadows twisted and swayed, creating a cacophony of whispers that clawed at Sarah's mind. Each step felt like wading through thick muck, every breath pulling her deeper into a quagmire of dread. The stench of decay and musty earth permeated the air, making her stomach churn. "Wait!" Lisa gasped, halting suddenly. "Did you see that?" "What?" Greg glanced back over his shoulder, anxiety etched across his face. "The trees! They're shifting," she stammered, eyes darting to an unseen threat lurking within the depths of the dark foliage. "Keep moving," Sarah barked, and though fear gnawed at her insides, she urged them forward. They sprinted down a narrow path where the fog hung heavy, curling like fingers around their ankles. Ahead, the oppressive blackness beckoned, full of a strange allure that made pain and panic seem distant. Tom's voice echoed in her ears. A beacon called from the void, an invitation to succumb. "Help me!" The call came again, a ghostly whisper that seemed to rise from the very earth beneath them. "Tom!" Sarah shouted, desperation emerging from the pit of her stomach. "Where are you?" Silence fell, thick and suffocating, while the earth trembled beneath her. For a heartbeat everything froze, the world suspended in terror. Then a rustling erupted from the thicket, and the creature, the one they'd fled, was back. It lunged from the shadows, blurry, moving faster than her eyes could process. "Run!" Greg exclaimed, grabbing Sarah's arm and dragging her forward. The air swelled with the heat of pursuit. The creature chased them relentlessly, a predator savoring the sweet thrill of the hunt. Sarah glanced back, heart racing, only to see it prowling close, a mass of snarling teeth and pulsating eyes, hungry and intent. The chill crept deeper into her bones, desperation clawing at her sanity. Suddenly, Lisa stumbled, falling hard onto the muddy ground. "I can't," she gasped, breathless and trembling. "Get up!" Sarah shouted, her breaths ripping from her chest. She lunged to pull Lisa upright, dragging her as best as she could. They had no time to lose. Ahead, the path forked yet again, and from the darkness an altar of jagged stones emerged, glinting with an eerie light. A dappled glow bounced off the rocks, illuminating symbols that writhed and twisted, shapes that whispered secrets in the darkness. Intrigued and horrified, Sarah felt a compulsion to stop. "Sarah!" Greg called, horror mingling with urgency. "We have to keep moving!" But the shadows danced, the altar a vortex of ancient power. Sarah's heart pounded as she moved closer, the air shimmering with danger. She glanced back at her friends, panic flashing across their faces. They were losing faith. "What if this leads us to Tom?" she wondered aloud, conflict drumming in her mind. "What if we can—" "Are you out of your mind?" Greg's voice snapped her back. "That's what they want." "Then what do we do?" Lisa whimpered, tears streaming down her dirty cheeks as she clung to Sarah's arm. The growl from behind was louder now, relentless. It trilled through the trees, the creature's presence like an electric pulse. A part of her wanted to save them all, but the shadows beckoned, promising to unveil the truth of Tom's disappearance. "Hurry!" Sarah urged, torn between the altar and the monstrous beast inching closer. "We can't stay here!" And as they turned away from the altar, another tremor rocked the ground beneath them, the crack of a branch splitting the night. Shadows surged, heavier now, swirling with a malevolence born from the deepest fears of humanity. "Run!" Sarah screamed once more, adrenaline sparking through her veins. The darkness loomed, whispering of sacrifices and ancient terror. But as they fled, the ground beneath Lisa gave way, and she shrieked, disappearing into a gaping maw of earth as though it were hungry for her. "No!" Greg lunged for her, but Sarah held him back, the futility hitting her like a punch. Guttural laughter echoed through the fog, a sound mingled with despair. It came from all around them, as if the forest itself was mocking their plight. "Do you hear it?" Sarah gasped, dread gnawing her gut. "It knows." And just then, a bone-chilling realization washed over her. The shadows weren't just consuming the path, they were consuming her friends. And soon, she felt, they had entered a realm where escape was a twisted illusion. Would they be able to save Lisa, or would they be devoured like so many before them? The truth loomed ahead like the inescapable maw of death, and they were running headlong into its grip. As they tore through the dark, heart pounding, they came upon the edge of a cliff. Below, darkness coiled like a serpent, and the wind shrieked an urgent warning. How far would they go to save one of their own, or would they let despair swallow them whole? The cliff's edge crumbled beneath their feet, jagged rocks dangling over an abyss that seemed to devour the light itself. Sarah could feel the wind whip around her, an unseen force pulling at her body, urging her to leap or to retreat. Heart racing, adrenaline coursed through her veins, and she fixed her gaze on the swirling darkness below that radiated a palpable hunger. "Tom!" she screamed again, voice cracking, but the call only echoed back to her, a cruel imitation. Greg's eyes widened, panic flooding his face as he grappled with the horrifying thought of losing another friend. "We can't stay here!" he yelled, unmistakable desperation leaking through his tone. But Sarah was trapped. The altar, the shadows, the past cries of Tom echoed in her mind. What if the altar, it could be a way to find him, she stammered, the possibility twisted in desperation, yet it felt so enticing. "Are you insane?" Greg's voice cracked like thunder. "We need to hurry. The beast is right behind us." Sarah felt a jolt, a surge of fear mixed with the thrill of the unknown. She looked back, and the creature had emerged from the shadows, fully formed, a grotesque mass of writhing limbs and eyes, glistening teeth ready to tear flesh. The mere sight sent her heart into a frantic escape, but her feet felt glued to the ground. "Run, now!" Greg shouted, grabbing her arm, pulling her back from the precipice, forcing her to focus on the only escape route left. They had to move, had to make a choice. "Lisa wouldn't want us to give up," she shouted, each word bursting from her like a dam overflowing. "She wouldn't want us to forget her." But just as Greg attempted to drag her away, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement below. Something stirred in the darkness. Was it Lisa? A shadow danced on the edge of visibility, beckoning her with ominous fingers. Each heartbeat roared in her ears as the laughter of the forest crescendoed around them, mocking her wavering resolve. The creature fixed its unblinking gaze on them, its breaths ragged and dripping with malice. In that moment, time slowed, existence dwindled. Whispers roared louder, drowning Sarah's thoughts. Choices dragged down her shoulders like lead weights. Leave or stay, fight or flee. "Sarah," Greg cried, shaking her fiercely, pulling her away from the ledge. "We're losing time." The ground rumbled, a low groan echoing like the voice of the forest announcing its hunger. The stone under their feet began to tremble, small rocks cascading into the void. A moment of clarity pierced her chaos. Tom's fate felt intertwined with each fear creeping into their reality. "No, I can't." The beast lurched, deciding, hungry for their despair. The forest twisted horrifically around them, branches curling like claws, reaching to snatch them away. Shadows writhed, their shapes converging like an impending storm. "Let's go!" Greg snarled, and with his hands gripping hers, he yanked her into a sprint as the shadows clawed at their heels. The echoes of their inhalations surged with panic, a race against the relentless abyss. Around them, the dense fog thickened, swirling and thickening like a web that itched against their skin. They stumbled forward, barely glancing at the encroaching shadows threatening to ensnare them. The feeling of despair hung heavy, mingled with the metallic tang of fear that clung to the air. Then a glimmer caught Sarah's eye, a wayward glint streaking through the darkness. Was it the altar? Was there still hope? Her heartbeat thundered as they approached, a flickering warmth amid the chill that pervaded. But suddenly the ground split open before them, a yawning chasm erupting from the earth, ravenous jaws ready to consume them. Sarah swerved, panic electrifying her limbs. They skidded to a halt, horror painted across their faces as they stood on the precipice of doom. "Climb!" Greg yelled, scrambling up a rocky ledge that jutted from the cliffside. Without thinking, Sarah followed, every muscle screaming for rest, every nerve electrified with the knowledge that the shadows would not wait. The beast was relentless, its sorrowful roar echoing like a warning behind them. With a desperate lunge, they grasped the rough edges, pulling themselves higher. The shadows tore at their heels, anger palpable in the air. Would they manage to escape and reach the safety of the surface? Just as Sarah clambered onto solid ground, she felt the earth tremor beneath her. The shadows wrestled to keep hold, louder now, swirling into a cyclone of chaos. Was it too late? Would this forest never relinquish its hunger for their souls? Suddenly, just above them, someone fell from the branches, tumbling like a broken doll. It was Lisa. "Help! Her scream was cut off, swallowed by the howling winds around them. Before Sarah could react, the shadows surged forward, claws extending, hungry to consume. What would she choose now? Fate hung precariously in the balance, and the terror of the unknown grew thicker than the fog. "Stay with me!" Greg griped tightly, but Sarah felt the weight of a decision looming, a heart-splitting moment between saving her friend or saving themselves. And with that weight, darkness tightened its grip, waiting for her answer with cruel anticipation. The darkness felt even more alive than before as the shadows danced erratically, breathing life into the very air around Sarah. The growls of the beast thrummed like a heartbeat beneath their feet, threatening to pull them back into its den of despair. Lisa teetered on the edge, her pale face frozen in sheer terror as she fought to grip the remains of her sanity. "Help!" Her voice was barely a whisper, desperation as tangible as the twisting roots creeping around Sarah's ankle. "Hold on, Lisa!" Greg shouted, pulling sharply at Sarah's arm. "We can't help her by getting caught ourselves!" But Sarah felt the pull deeper, a weight in her chest that forced her to look back at her friend, flailing against the deep shadows clawing at her. That cry, piercing and raw, shattered the adhesive grip of panic, suffocating her thoughts. "I can't just leave her!" As the growl echoed through the void, Sarah's heart raced like a drum in her ears. She had come this far. "We're not losing anyone else." The words tumbled from her lips, heart pounding against the hard truth of it all. Without thinking, she lunged forward. She heard Greg shout behind her, but all she could focus on was Lisa's face, locked in a horror that echoed her own deep-set fear. Racing toward her friend, Sarah fought against the tightening grip of the dark tendrils that spiraled towards them, dancing in the choking fog. "Grab my hand!" Sarah extended her arm, trembling yet determined. "Sarah, no!" Greg's voice shattered through the darkness, but she couldn't listen. With every inch pushing her closer, she could feel the strength of that tether linking them anew. With one desperate reach, Lisa wrapped her fingers around Sarah's wrist, her eyes wide and pleading. "Please, don't let go." "I won't," Sarah gasped. In that moment, a shift occurred. The shadows howled as if in pain. They recoiled, thrashing in fury. It was a tiny victory, but enough to give Sarah the momentum needed. With every ounce of strength she pulled, feeling Lisa slip further against the dark rumbling around her. "I got you! I got you!" Sarah screamed, dragging Lisa closer, the whispers around them rising to a shrill frenzy. But then the ground shuddered. It felt as if the forest itself was screaming as the very roots of the island raged against them. Beneath their feet, the earth twisted into a gaping maw. "Let her go! It'll take you too!" Greg's warning echoed against the pounding chaos they faced. "No, I can't!" Sarah cried, gazing into Lisa's terrified eyes, her grip tightening. "Just pull harder!" Lisa screamed, anguish spilling with every breath. The shadows surged again, wrapping around Lisa's legs, dragging her down into the horrifying depths. "You need to let go of her!" Greg shouted, desperation boiling over into each word. "She'll drag us under." But Sarah felt rooted, a part of her refusing to accept defeat. The fight within Lisa shone like a flickering candle against the overwhelming darkness. "I can't leave her." And then an idea struck. She grasped tighter, finding her voice in the chaos. "We're stronger together. Listen, Lisa." "Yeah?" she panted, struggling against the shadows. "Repeat after me. We are not afraid." Sarah forced the words out, determination setting a fire alight within her heart. "We are not afraid," Lisa echoed, voice tremulous with fear but resonating with defiance. "Now," Sarah bellowed, "we're leaving this dark place behind." Leaving this dark place behind. Their joined voices clung together in the void, gaining power, light pushing against the relentless shadows. The air trembled, the fog swirling chaotically, but through it all they stood united, not just for survival, but in the embrace of defiance. "Pull!" they shouted together, and with one final surge, the shadows relented, as if they had been struck by an unholy light. The ground cracked and groaned, roots exploding from below as arcs of energy burst forth, sending the shadows reeling. And then freedom, raw and exhilarating. They stumbled back from the edge, pulling Lisa up and forcing their way through the thick choke of fog. Greg reached out, yanking them both forward. "Let's go, now!" They sprinted through the dense tree line, hearts beating as one, propelled not by fear, but by the resolve to survive. The island, in its rage, howled behind them, but they pressed on, legs screaming, lungs burning. As the trees began to thin, they caught glimpses of light filtering through the foliage ahead. And then the clearing, open and bright, holding the promise of salvation. Sarah sprinted toward it, feeling the warmth of the sunlight wash over her face as laughter trickled back into their hearts. They stumbled into the clearing, breathing hard, faces drenched in triumph and relief. The shadows receded, unable to follow them into the light. "No more running," Lisa murmured, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "No," Sarah agreed, clasping her friends close. "We're here now." They stood there, together, no voices of the unseen haunting them any longer. As they caught their breath, a small spark of hope ignited in their hearts. That night had unraveled, cloaked in shadows and terrors they thought would bury them. But as dawn broke, it spilled over them like magic, warming their spirits and reminding them they had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. This was their moment, filled with laughter and life, as they vowed never to return to the island's suffocating embrace. Together, they turned their backs to the island, its cursed secrets a distant whisper, behind them forever. And as they walked into the new day, they knew that no overbearing darkness could chain them ever again. If you loved this conclusion and want to dive into more chilling tales like this, you need to subscribe now. You don't want to miss out on more exclusive stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Smash that like button to feed the algorithm and ensure more spine-tingling content comes your way. We want to hear from you. Flood that comment section with your thoughts and theories. What did you think of the ending? And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this breathtaking conclusion. True fans understand the importance of showing their support. Let's keep this story alive and share the thrill.